Racist cop aims gun at black judge in courtroom showdown. If you think you've heard every story of courtroom drama, think again. This is the tale of a disgraced officer, determined to prove his dominance right in front of a federal judge he never believed should be on the bench. From the moment Officer Brent Maddox steps into the courthouse, tension thickens like a humid summer day, so heavy it's hard to breathe. Across the aisle sits Judge Vanessa Rhodes, the precise target of his seething resentment. When Maddox finally snaps, his brazen act shakes the entire city to its core and uncovers a disturbing system of quiet protections. Yet, in that flash of violence, a surge of truth emerges, and this time it refuses to be ignored. The Charleston Federal Courthouse, an ornate building of marble columns and polished floors, glistened under a hesitant morning sun. Clouds hovered overhead, as if reluctant to disperse and give way to the events that were about to unfold. Inside, the corridors buzzed with an undercurrent of unease. Courtroom 2B, in particular, seemed to magnetize clerks, staff, and reporters, all curious to witness the trial of a police officer whose reputation for crossing lines had, until recently, never caught up with him. That officer was Brent Maddox. Broad-shouldered and stiff-backed, he sat at the defense table in a suit that fit poorly around his biceps, as though he was more accustomed to ballistic vests than courtroom attire. His lawyer whispered urgent reminders to remain calm, but Maddox appeared more annoyed by these admonitions than guided by them. It wasn't the charges that unsettled him. Misconduct might have landed him in front of a judge, but that alone didn't scare him. What infuriated him was the presiding judge herself. Judge Vanessa Rhodes, a black woman he simply couldn't accept as an authority over him. Over the years, Maddox had cultivated an attitude that placed him above certain rules. Now, forced to answer to someone who, in his view, did not belong on the bench, he bristled with an anger that simmered in every breath he took. A hush fell as the back door opened and Judge Rhodes entered. Her black robe swept elegantly behind her. She took her seat with a dignity born from 2 decades of service. Observers in the gallery straightened in silent respect. For Maddox, her mere presence was an offense he refused to hide. His clenched jaw and barely contained sneer betrayed a disdain that was personal rather than professional. "Good morning," the judge began, her tone crisp but balanced. "We continued testimony in the matter of Officer Brent Maddox. Her gavels during this trial, gentle yet firm, had proven that composure under fire was something she possessed in spades. The prosecution called a forensic analyst to recap damning evidence, radio logs that didn't match official times, body cam footage that was suspiciously incomplete, and a dash cam recording that contradicted Maddox's sworn statements. Bit by bit, it became clear that the evidence he had submitted was, at best, heavily doctored. As these pieces fell into place, the tension in the gallery only intensified. Maddox muttered darkly under his breath. Even those in the front rows couldn't make out the words, but they felt his anger like static electricity. Judge Rhodes cautioned him not to interrupt. "Save your arguments for your counsel," she said, in that calmly authoritative voice. He shot back a mumbled protest, and her eyes flicked toward him in silent warning. During a brief recess, reporters tweeted updates, while quiet murmurs filled the corridor. Witness after witness had chipped away at whatever official veneer Maddox once had, suggesting a pattern of brutality and cover-ups. Still, he refused to concede any wrong. When the judge announced another short break, he glowered at her as though she was personally orchestrating his downfall. Behind closed doors, Judge Rhodes conferred with her clerks. She maintained her usual poised bearing, but they could sense her heightened awareness of what Maddox was capable of. A man backed into a corner, fueled by anger, was not to be underestimated. Sure enough, when the court reconvened, the next piece of testimony from a sergeant who had previously filed a complaint against Maddox lit a match. This sergeant explained how internal affairs had dismissed prior allegations, how crucial footage had gone missing. Maddox was nearly snarling with rage at this point, loudly labeling the testimony a lie. Judge Rhodes fixed him with a level gaze. "Mr. Maddox, this is your last warning. You will maintain order or be removed." He rose from his seat. His lawyer tried to tug him down, to no avail. Maddox launched into an outburst that echoed throughout the chamber. "You think you can judge me? You're the one sitting there, never bled in the streets for public safety." The bailiffs tensed. It was an audacious stance for a man under indictment, but arrogance seemed to surge through his veins. "If this were a fair system," he continued, pointing an accusing finger at the judge, "I wouldn't even be on trial." Calmly, Judge Rhodes lifted her gavel. "Sit, Mr. Maddox." He did not. A wave of apprehension rippled through the gallery. That second was the pivot. He reached inside his coat. Time slowed to a dreadful crawl as the metallic glint of a firearm caught the overhead lights. Panic flared in the faces around him. Reporters dropped pens, clerks ducked beneath their desks, and bailiffs instinctively moved to form a protective stance around the judge. Maddox pointed the gun, voice raw with bitterness. "No one moves, or I promise you'll regret it." A hush fell so absolute that you could almost hear hearts pounding. Judge Rhodes, behind the bench, did not flinch. Her chin remained high. "You brought a weapon into my courtroom," she said, her tone grave. He shrugged, gun still trained. "Better believe I did. Because you and your so-called justice have gone too far." The bailiffs hovered, uncertain whether a sudden move might provoke a bullet. Maddox turned his weapon from the bailiffs back to the judge. "Stop looking at me like I'm some criminal," he snapped, spittle gathering at the corners of his mouth. "I wore a badge. I was a hero to this city." Judge Rhodes regarded him steadily. "Heroes do not hold a courtroom hostage, Mr. Maddox," she replied, voice unwavering. He smirked, though tension radiated off him in waves. "You and I both know the system's rigged. And you had a stake in this from day one." Her eyes never left his. "I upheld the oath I swore. It's you who decided you were above it." Outside, courthouse security and SWAT teams mobilized. Detective Carla Unguyan, a stern woman with tactical expertise, led a silent approach up the back stairs and along the side corridors. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, the hostage crisis had sealed the doors. Panic had not devolved into chaos yet. Many in the gallery crouched low behind benches, trying to remain invisible. Maddox's anger found new fuel. "Drop your eyes," he ordered the judge. "Acknowledge that you're inferior to me." There was no movement behind the bench. "I will do no such thing," Rhodes answered, each syllable calm but uncompromising. An unsettling grin spread across Maddox's face. "I should have stopped this circus a long time ago." Suddenly, he took a step forward, as if about to charge the bench. The bailiffs braced, shouting warnings. But Judge Rhodes raised a hand. "Mr. Maddox," she said, "you're not just harming yourself. You're setting in motion events you can't control." Something in her words reached him, or perhaps it was the row of cameras aimed from a safe distance, capturing his every move. He seemed rattled for a heartbeat. Then, with a snarl, he pivoted, barking commands to the entire courtroom to stay down. Detective Nguyen positioned her team near two entrances, waiting for the signal. She heard muffled shouting and recognized the possibility of a shot being fired at any second. Her earpiece crackled with updates. The moment felt like a coiled spring, ready to explode. Finally, as Maddox's voice escalated once again, the bailiffs and SWAT officers initiated a simultaneous breach. The doors burst open. Armed responders flooded the aisles, rifles up. "Police! Put the gun down!" a SWAT member roared. The courtroom became a collage of fear and tension. Maddox whipped around, leveling his firearm. His eyes darted wildly, first at the officers, then at Judge Rhodes, as though trying to decide where to aim. A single shot rang out. It cracked through the air like lightning. Screams followed. Then, astonishingly, Judge Rhodes remained standing, untouched. The bullet had lodged into the bench behind her, leaving a scorching hole. Before Maddox could fire again, a shield-bearing SWAT officer rammed him, pinning him against the jury box. Two more officers joined, wrenching his gun away and forcing his arms behind his back. He was on the ground, breathing raggedly, the side of his face pressed to the floor. The spectacle was over within seconds, but the shockwaves would resonate far beyond that day. A hush smothered the room. Several minutes elapsed before bystanders rose from behind benches. Trembling, one or two reporters crept closer, phones still capturing every second. Maddox lay subdued, eyes glazed with disbelief. Judge Rhodes slowly stepped down from the bench, checking on those near her to confirm no one else was injured. The chaos moved swiftly to triage mode. Paramedics checked a few people for minor cuts from flying wood fragments. Through it all, the judge's composure never broke. She offered no triumphant speech. She simply assisted where she could, ensuring everyone was accounted for. Maddox was hauled out in cuffs, a sight that ignited a flurry of shutters from cameras and a ripple of conversation that was half relief, half outrage. Outside, crowds formed with signs. Some demanded further investigations into the department that allowed Maddox to continue wearing a badge for so long. Others insisted on immediate political accountability. Judge Rhodes found a moment of solitude in her chambers, where she listened to the dull roar of commotion beyond the door. A bullet hole in her bench, and a city awakened to rot under the surface were the day's legacies. She knew the unveiling had only just begun. Within 48 hours, local news outlets dissected every detail: old misconduct allegations, missing body cam footage, the string of second chances that had followed Maddox through his career. Public pressure demanded more than a superficial inquiry, and the city's leadership scrambled to respond. Officials initially tried to shrug off blame by painting Maddox as a lone bad actor. But that narrative quickly faltered under the weight of documented patterns. In her office, Judge Rhodes meticulously gathered the paperwork that had once sat in dusty archives. She discovered complaint after complaint, dismissed with suspicious speed. Whispered accusations from within the department suggested that each time Maddox crossed a line, superiors had quietly transferred him or lost the evidence. Meanwhile, Detective Ngayan, the officer who had led the SWAT team, brought her own stack of documents. She confirmed that Maddox had been reassigned multiple times, always landing in positions with less scrutiny. "We believe at least 2 senior officers facilitated these moves," she confided. Every time a problem surfaced, they buried it. Rhodes was no stranger to systemic issues. She had spent years witnessing them trickle into her courtroom. But this was different. A policeman had aimed a loaded gun at her in plain sight, and the city could no longer claim ignorance. She and a small, devoted group of investigators and journalists, including reporter Tiffany Hall, began mapping out the connections, from internal affairs to top brass. Tiffany Hall, a tenacious reporter who'd covered local politics, had never seen such a fervor around a single case. She interviewed families who claimed that Maddox escalated routine stops into violent confrontations. She spoke with officers who admitted, off the record, that they'd been advised to keep their mouths shut. The more Hall uncovered, the deeper the conspiracy seemed to run. It was Hall's article, published under the headline, "Who Protected Officer Maddox?" that sparked citywide protests. It detailed new revelations, hush settlements to victims, altered disciplinary records, and the same few signatures repeating across internal memos. The city's attempt to isolate Maddox as a rogue cop quickly lost steam. People demanded to know who else had opened these escape hatches for him. With rising public outrage, state legislators called for an oversight hearing. The hearing would investigate not only Maddox's actions, but also the entire departmental structure that had allowed him to remain in uniform. Judge Rhodes found herself at the center of a movement she had never asked to lead. She received letters, some praising her fortitude, others accusing her of fueling a crusade against law enforcement. Yet her focus remained clear: accountability. She was determined to use her position and influence to unearth every document and every name behind Maddox's shield. "We're not after good officers," she told a local radio station. "We're after the system that protects bad ones." When the first day of the oversight hearing arrived, the chamber was packed. People jostled for seats, and lines formed outside. A mother took the stand, describing the night Maddox pulled her 17-year-old son from a car, slamming him to the ground. She held up photos of a bruised face and broken ribs. Her official complaint had been dismissed in under a week. The heartbreak in her voice reverberated through every person listening. The second witness, a retired officer from another precinct, confirmed that the department had a well-known, though never formally acknowledged, strategy of reassigning problematic individuals instead of firing them. His testimony made it clear that this wasn't only about one officer's moral failings, it was about a culture that prioritized preserving the department's image over the truth. As the hearings continued, a quiet panic seized certain corners of City Hall. High-ranking officials scrambled to claim ignorance or distance themselves from their own signatures. The district attorney's office found itself under particular scrutiny. Records showed that repeated warnings about Maddox were submitted but never acted upon. The office offered an internal review that critics dismissed as too little, too late. Behind the scenes, Judge Rhodes received a call requesting a private meeting with the district attorney, Leonard Price. He tried to argue that sudden reforms would undermine public trust. She countered that public trust was already in tatters, and that the best way to restore it was with transparency. Their exchange ended in stalemate. Meanwhile, Tiffany Hall's articles gained traction beyond state lines. Civil rights groups circulated them nationally, prompting other jurisdictions to look closely at their own questionable practices. In Charleston, activists held peaceful marches and candlelight vigils, urging the city council to enact deeper reforms. Finally, faced with undeniable evidence and unrelenting public pressure, the police commissioner and several top brass announced early retirements. The district attorney's office declared it would cooperate with a broad investigation, and multiple internal affairs officers were placed under suspension. Yet many in the community wondered if this was enough. Were these resignations simply an escape hatch for those who had protected Maddox? With the entire city riveted, the Oversight Committee convened one more time. This session included top officials testifying under oath. Judge Rhodes sat in the gallery, wearing a muted suit rather than her judicial robe, observing intently. The commissioner's prepared statement praised new oversight committees and improved training measures. It was bureaucratic language, carefully polished to sound sincere. But the moment Rhodes stepped to the podium as a witness, the atmosphere shifted. She spoke plainly. For years, certain leaders have praised numbers and lowered complaint rates as signs of improvement. In reality, they bypassed accountability, leaving communities unprotected from the few who corrupted the badge. Holding up documents uncovered by Tiffany Hall and Detective Ngayan, she presented email chains in which superiors specifically planned to bury Maddox's repeated transgressions for fear of bad press. The hush that fell across the room was laced with both awe and anger. By the end of that hearing, the committee voted to implement every one of Judge Rhodes's recommendations: an independent civilian board to oversee officer misconduct, immediate audits of all body cam footage, and suspension of any officer under credible suspicion, pending full review. The district attorney's office found itself compelled to undergo an external audit. Public response was mixed with relief and skepticism. Would these reforms be enough, or would they get watered down once headlines moved on? Only time would tell. But there was no question that the system had been jolted from the inside. Meanwhile, the criminal trial of Brent Maddox proceeded. Though overshadowed by the larger revelations of systemic misconduct, it held enormous symbolic weight. Gone was his bravado. He appeared in a plain suit each day, flanked by a new defense attorney who tried to paint him as a man pushed too far by stress and departmental neglect. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple eyewitness accounts, ballistic analysis linking him to the shot in the courtroom, and intangible but powerful footage of him brandishing a gun at a federal judge. During closing arguments, the prosecutor didn't mince words. Officer Maddox believed himself above the law, fueled by an institution that tacitly agreed with him. But his final act, a firearm aimed at an unarmed woman in a seat of justice, destroyed that veil. The jury was out for less than a day. When they returned, the verdict was unequivocal. Guilty on all counts, including attempted murder of a federal judge, illegal possession of a firearm in a secured building, and aggravated assault. The sentencing would come in 2 months, but the conviction carried a near-certain outcome. Judge Rhodes watched from the gallery, expression calm. She did not smile as the verdict was announced. The weight of the case, the damage done, and the countless people affected by Maddox's actions held her steady. As he was taken away, he refused to look at her. In the days that followed, the city buzzed with a new kind of energy. Volunteers organized Know Your Rights seminars, teaching community members how to file complaints and track them. Former officers who had once felt silenced came forward with additional stories, offering more evidence of a pattern that transcended a single department. Charleston's City Council approved measures to fund the Civilian Oversight Board more robustly. Detectives like Carla Nguyen joined committees that would review old cases where body cam footage had been mysteriously lost. Tiffany Hall continued publishing investigations, exposing not only police misconduct, but also the City Hall officials who had consistently downplayed it. One morning, Judge Rhodes received a call from a federal subcommittee on police reform. They asked if she would join a panel dedicated to drafting model legislation aimed at deterring exactly the kind of institutional cover-up revealed in Charleston. She knew it would be a challenge. Bureaucracies have a way of defending themselves. Nonetheless, she agreed, because refusing would mean allowing silence to reclaim the space that had been so hard won. Standing at her office window, she gazed upon the crowd outside the courthouse. Some carried signs that read, "Justice is accountability and reform now." Unlike the chaos of the initial protests, the air hummed with a sense of determined unity. These were no longer voices crying in the wilderness. They were citizens who had found the power of collective action. Official bulletins announced that any officer with multiple complaints on file would now undergo a thorough review process, led by the newly formed civilian board. It wasn't perfect. There were already murmurs of union resistance, of lawsuits claiming breach of contract, but it was a start. Public forums were scheduled, allowing residents to voice their concerns directly to the board. For once, it looked like the city might be listening. Judge Rhodes decided to step away from the spotlight. She had been the face of calm in a storm that had nearly ended in tragedy, but the true victory lay in the communities taking ownership of their future. She quietly told her clerks that the real achievement would be if no single figure was deemed the hero. The best heroes, she believed, were those who reclaimed their voices. Maddox's sentencing took place in another courthouse, under a different judge. He arrived in shackles. Family members watched silently as the prosecution reviewed the scope of harm. Several victims took the stand to describe how his actions had shattered their sense of safety. The judge issued a severe sentence, echoing the gravity of pointing a weapon at a federal judge and a packed courtroom. Outside, there was no celebratory mood, only the quiet understanding that one man's punishment could not rectify the years of abuse. Still, for many, it was a sign that the city would no longer tolerate the behavior of those who believed the badge put them above the law. At City Hall, a new atmosphere took hold. Press conferences highlighted the next steps for structural changes. Police cadets would be trained under revised guidelines, emphasizing de-escalation and civilian respect. Anonymous tip lines were funded, allowing whistleblowers to come forward safely. Even the once defensive district attorney's office began adopting policies for immediate external reviews of police-related complaints. Tiffany Hall's final piece in her investigative series was titled "Charleston at a Crossroads. Will We Keep Listening?" She made it clear that this moment could be a fleeting milestone if the city failed to remain vigilant. There were no illusions of a utopia, but there was a commitment forming a vow to question complacency. Within weeks, someone began painting a mural along the outer courthouse wall. It started with a single name, one of Maddox's first reported victims. Then, beneath that, more names appeared in bright colors. Names of citizens, officers who had told the truth, and even those who had once been silent but found their voice. The mural was not sanctioned, but officials decided not to remove it. It became a testament to a city acknowledging both its traumas and its resilience. Judge Rhodes sometimes paused there on her way into work, reading the new editions. She viewed it as a living document, a reminder that behind every policy reform stood real people. Eventually, a group of art students asked for permission to seal the mural so it would remain weatherproof. The city council agreed unanimously. Charleston's transformation was still a tender shoot. There were heated debates in council meetings, budget battles over the scope of the civilian board, and pockets of resistance. But the difference now was daylight. Everything was exposed. Because of that, corruption and negligence had fewer shadows in which to hide. Some saw parallels with other cities that had tried, and often stumbled, in their own reform efforts. But a persistent belief took hold among Charleston's citizenry that if they kept sharing testimonies, if they kept pushing back against attempts to bury facts, something more lasting could be built. For her part, Judge Rhodes continued her judicial duties, hearing a range of cases that were less dramatic but no less important. She carried with her the memory of a bullet hole in a bench, a symbol of how close fear had come to winning. Instead, accountability had seized the day, albeit at a tremendous cost. Behind the scenes, she worked with the Oversight Board and joined those federal talks on reform. She recognized that the city's journey was nowhere near complete. But she had seen enough to believe that, now, Charleston would never again ignore a crisis brewing in its own ranks. No one in Charleston forgets the day Officer Maddox aimed a gun at a black female judge. It's whispered about in corners of cafes and retold in law school lectures about the fragility of institutional trust. More importantly, it's remembered as a pivot. A day when the city could no longer rationalize away the warnings. They say tragedies expose the fault lines beneath society's surface. In that sense, Maddox's final desperate grasp at power tore open a breach that forced people to look down and see how far corruption had spread. Once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Despite everything, Charleston breathed a new kind of air, full of tension, yes, but also full of determination. Judge Rhodes realized that, ironically, the man who tried to silence her had given the entire city a microphone, amplifying voices that once went unheard. And if there was any consolation, it was in that unstoppable tide of shared truth. which had the potential to uproot any injustice that dared remain in the shadows. This was the moment when a hardened police officer collided with a judge's unwavering resolve and, in doing so, unearthed a system that badly needed the light of day. Charleston realized that justice doesn't begin or end with a single verdict. It thrives in continuous scrutiny, in each story bravely told, and in every collective push for accountability. Judge Rhodes exemplified the courage it takes to stand firm, not for personal glory, but for everyone who had been silenced. In the aftermath, an entire community discovered its own strength and held institutions to a higher standard. If you found hope in this story of transformation, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more narratives where truth triumphs, even against formidable odds. And hit the like button to let us know you want more stories that inspire real change. Your voice matters. Keep using it.